So just having a look at the overall approach that we took, the procedure for it. So before the intervention started, waste audits were conducted. These were by Recorra. And these randomly selected a subsample of the waste in the compost bins, as well as the dry mix recycling and the general waste bin, so that we've got an objective measure of the percentage of waste in that bin that is compostable packaging. The intervention then started and it lasted for 1 month. So here, all of those 5 components of the intervention are delivered. We then had another waste audit, so we can look to see, has the intervention changed the amount of compostable packaging that is in the compost bins? We then followed this up again 2 months later to see whether any changes had sustained over time. And just to point out, the labels that were on the packaging lasted for that 1 month and then until the supply ran out. And then there were no further supply of labels given during that 2 month period. So during this time, the signage stayed in place, but the compostable packaging no longer had the labels on it. And just to point out, at the workplaces, the idea is that in the compost bins, they should mostly contain compostable packaging. They can also have food scraps as well. So we'll go over the results for each of the 3 sites. So we've labelled them as A, B and C. We're going to start off with site B because there were waste audits done at each of those 3 time points before, after the intervention, and then at around 2 months follow-up. That was done a little bit later with this one. But we can see this is the compost bin and the percentage of waste in that compost bins that was compostable packaging. And it starts out at just around 25% that it starts out with before the intervention. After the intervention, we can see this midpoint here. The amount of compostable packaging has increased. So now 88% of that bin is compostable packaging. Then around at our second time point, at the follow-up point, we can see it's slightly dropped, but it's still substantially higher compared to before the intervention. So we can see at this one workplace, the intervention has been effective at increasing the amount of compostable packaging collected. Next slide, please. This slide here shows the results for site A and also for workplace site C. And again, we can see that before the intervention, the amount of waste in the compostable bin is 38% at site A, and at C it's 32%. We did some more waste audits at both of these sites. So there was one initially around 2 weeks later at both sites. So for site A, we can see a very small drop at this 2 weeks, but then at our official waste measurement point, 1 month later, we can see this increase to 58% of the waste in that bin is compostable packaging, which is 20% more than before the intervention. And again, at follow-up, we've got it go up to 88%. Over at site C, we've also around the 2 week waste audit done, there's an increase to 32%. 1 month later, it's 37%. So at this official 1 month follow-up, 5% greater than before. And then at the 2 month follow-up, it's gone up to 71%. So again, at both sites, at follow-up, we've got a substantial increase in the amount of compostable packaging in the compost bin. And Rosie, if you can just hit next. These 2 sites are different to the first site because we also had the opportunity to go back 6 months later and have a look at what was going on and how much waste in the compost bins was compostable packaging. And that's what's shown on these final points on the graphs. We can see that the amount of compostable packaging collected did reduce at that 6 month point. However, at both sites, this is still higher compared to before the intervention, and especially for workplace C, where it's still at least 20% more than it was before the intervention. So again, combined, we can see that these interventions have been effective at increasing the amount of compostable packaging collected from the compost bins. And I'll pass over to Tom.
Hi, so Nicola's given you a very the academic perspective, looking at the compostable packaging. From an operational perspective, we also food is something which is fine in composting collections, because our composting site is very happy to take food. So from an operational perspective, we look at not just the percentage of compostable packaging, but also the percentage of the combined with food. So this is the same data. So the brown line on that graph is Nicola's data, but the pink line also includes food waste. At site A, which is a very large multi-occupier site, it's physically complex. The workforce is a little bit transient. We saw that very high increase, and then there is a drop off. So what that told us from an operational perspective is these interventions really do work, but in a large complex site, you've got to keep things going because things did drop off a little bit. Next slide, please. The second site, which again, the brown line is the numbers that Nicola gave, just looking at packaging. The pink line is includes food. And the good thing about having food in with the compostable packaging, it stops it going in mixed recycling or in paper or some other recycling stream, which we really don't like food in other streams. So one of the benefits of compostable packaging from our perspective is if we do get food out of other recycling streams, and that's why it's important that we look at that from an operational perspective. So this was is a relatively simple site, a few hundred users, and what we see here is that the fantastic uplift when the interventions came in, and if you also look at the including food in there, we're still at 86% target material at the end of the follow-up, which is a phenomenal result. And if we could achieve that across all our recycling streams, we'd be absolutely delighted. Next slide, please. Now, site C had quite a lot of, again, is a mid-sized single occupier site, and Nicola's line is brown and things bounced around a little bit. Started off at 32, ends up at 54. That site had quite a lot of food in its compostable bins, and if you add food in, you see our pink line. In fact, that site has got very good recycling statistics. It's got a good record, and it started off with food at 91%, and it's kind of it bounces around and stays very high all the way through. So again, looking at just the brown lines, it gives you one story, but actually that is from an operational perspective, that is a site which is delivering very high quality compostable material. Nicola, back to you.
Great, thanks, Tam. So just to confirm then, across all three workplaces, the intervention was deemed to be successful. We've got on this graph here the average. When we pull together the results from those three workplaces, we can see the average of the waste in the compost bins before, 1 month later, and 2 months after the intervention. And we can see this increase happening in response to the intervention. And we did have at 2 of the sites, which isn't shown here, that 6 month follow-up as well. And even though we did see the amount drop for one of the sites especially, it still remained substantially higher compared to before the intervention. And this is really important. Before we started the trial, we set 10% increase in compostable packaging to be a meaningful change. So that was informed from Recorra as part of considered to be an industry meaningful change. And the amounts of the increases that we see have exceeded that 10% benchmark that has been set here. So overall, we can see that the interventions have been effective at increasing the amount of compostable packaging going into the right bin. Next slide. So after the intervention, we wanted to hear from the workplace sites what they thought the intervention was like, what was their experience, and did they think it's something that could be followed up afterwards? And we had some really interesting insights from the workplaces. So this was at a roundtable event where we all met as partners and discussed the research with them. And the workplaces said how the labels and the signage were considered to be the most effective components of each of those components that we delivered. There's some quotes here, and one of the workplaces said they were the biggest difference maker. And another workplace said how one of our people who hates change sent me a photo of this label and said, "This is amazing." And there was also discussions around continuing to use labels. So one workplace especially wanted to continue using the labels and also sharing this with others to try and encourage the use of these labels. However, we recognise that as part of the sector, compostable packaging, there currently are no uniform or certified labels that are used for compostable packaging. So this throws up one of the challenges in that even though we did this for the trial and it's shown that it's to be effective, nobody owns that color pink or that type of label. So moving forwards, it would be really great to be able to use evidence like what we've generated here to support the case for a uniform label that can be used for compostable packaging. Next slide. So we have some recommendations to end with. So firstly, based on the results from this trial, compostable packaging producers would really recommend they label packaging with a clear and distinctive uniform symbol to identify it as compostable and specify how to dispose of it. And workplaces should display clear signs that show which items are for the compostable bins and position these signs close to the bins where staff will be sorting and disposing their waste, so it's really clear for them what to do. We also recommend that we match the design of the bins with packaging labels. For example, we had that matched colour, meaning that it just forms that association. It doesn't need much processing. People can automatically see the colour pink on the packaging and see a bin that is also marked out as pink and put it in there. And we also recommend having compost bins that are available in locations where people are disposing of compostable packaging to provide that opportunity to actually put compostable packaging in the right bin.
Thanks, Nicola. And the key learnings from Recorra, as these were our sites that were being where the test was going on, and we were learning all the time from the team at Hubbub and from the team at Sheffield about how to do good interventions. And the interventions we've learned don't just apply to compostable packaging; they apply to all the different streams that we collect from our sites. And what became very clear to us, and we do a lot of very good sustainability work with our customers, was the importance of the three elements of the behavior change model. So having motivation and the people really wanting to get things right, the opportunity, they have access to the right bins, and they have importantly, they're the culture of the organizations we work with have a pro recycling culture and a capability understanding which is the right bin to pick, and the learnings that we got from that, which we'll be applying to all our work going forward on sustainability on all different recycling streams with our customers, is that you need all those three motivations in place at the same time in order to get really good results. And some of the excellent results that we saw at the sites were because all those three things were in place.